The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty checkpoint as Marcus Thompson adjusted his tactical vest for what felt like the 100th time. The weight of his rifle felt familiar against his shoulder, a constant companion during his 18 months as a private security contractor in the volatile region. What should have been a routine convoy escort mission was about to become the longest day of his life. The armored vehicles sat in formation, their engines rumbling like caged beasts ready to prowl the dangerous highways that connected military installations across the war-torn landscape. Marcus had done this run dozens of times before, but something felt different today. Maybe it was the intelligence reports that had been filtering in about increased insurgent activity in the area, or perhaps it was just the gnawing feeling in his gut that experienced soldiers learn never to ignore. His team consisted of 12 contractors from various backgrounds. There was Rodriguez, a former Marine who still carried himself with military precision despite being out of service for 3 years. Jenkins, an ex-Army Ranger who spoke little but observed everything with the intensity of a hawk watching for prey. Thompson himself had served 2 tours with the 82nd Airborne before transitioning to private security work, drawn by the higher pay and the promise of using his skills in a different capacity. The mission briefing had been straightforward enough. They were to escort a supply convoy carrying essential materials to Forward Operating Base Delta, approximately 60 miles through territory that had seen sporadic but deadly attacks over the past month. The route would take them through 3 known choke points where previous convoys had been hit, but intelligence suggested the roads were currently clear of immediate threats. As the convoy commander, Sarah Mitchell, gave final instructions over the radio, Marcus checked his equipment one last time. His M4 carbine was loaded with a full magazine, safety on but ready to engage at a moment's notice. Extra ammunition magazines were secured in his tactical vest, along with a field medical kit and emergency communications gear. The body armor felt heavy but reassuring, though he knew from experience that even the best protection was no guarantee in a firefight. The lead vehicle was an up-armored Humvee with a gunner manning a .50 caliber machine gun in the turret. Marcus rode in the second vehicle, responsible for communications and coordination with the trailing security teams. Behind them followed 3 supply trucks loaded with everything from medical supplies to ammunition, each one representing a critical lifeline for the soldiers waiting at the forward base. The convoy rolled out at exactly 0800 hours, maintaining precise spacing between vehicles as they left the relative safety of the main base. The landscape outside was deceptively peaceful, with rolling hills covered in sparse vegetation stretching toward distant mountains. Children waved from doorways of mud brick houses scattered along the roadside, their smiles genuine despite the tension that hung over the region like a persistent fog. Marcus maintained constant radio contact with both the lead and trailing vehicles, calling out landmarks and potential trouble spots as they progressed along the predetermined route. The first 20 miles passed without incident, though everyone remained on high alert. Years of experience had taught him that complacency was the enemy's best friend, and successful ambushes often came when guards were down. The convoy passed through the first checkpoint without incident, exchanging brief pleasantries with the local security forces who had established a small outpost at a key intersection. The soldiers looked tired but alert, their equipment well-maintained despite the harsh conditions. Marcus noticed how their eyes constantly scanned the surrounding terrain, a habit that became second nature to anyone who had spent time in hostile territory. As they approached the second phase of their journey, the terrain began to change. The relatively open ground gave way to more challenging topography, with rocky outcroppings and dense vegetation providing numerous potential hiding spots for hostile forces. The road itself became more winding, forcing the convoy to reduce speed and limiting visibility around turns. It was Rodriguez who first noticed something amiss. His voice crackled over the radio with the calm professionalism that marked experienced security personnel. Lead vehicle, this is 2. I've got possible movement in the tree line, approximately 200 meters to our east. Could be civilians, but worth keeping an eye on. Mitchell's response was immediate and measured. Copy that, 2. All vehicles maintain current speed and spacing. Eyes open, everyone. Jenkins, anything from your position? The response from the trailing vehicle confirmed what everyone was beginning to sense. The landscape that had seemed peaceful moments before now felt charged with potential danger. Every shadow could conceal a threat. Every distant figure might be conducting surveillance on their movements. Marcus felt his training kick in as adrenaline began to sharpen his focus. His breathing remained steady and controlled, but every sense was heightened. The familiar weight of his weapon became more pronounced, and he found himself mentally rehearsing the immediate action drills that could mean the difference between life and death if contact was made with hostile forces. The convoy continued its progression through increasingly difficult terrain, with each vehicle maintaining visual contact with the others while remaining ready to respond to threats from any direction. Radio chatter was kept to essential communications only, but the tension was palpable even through the static-filled transmissions. What none of them realized as they navigated the winding road was that they were being watched by more than just casual observers. Hidden among the rocks and vegetation, hostile forces had been tracking their movement for the past several miles, patiently waiting for the perfect moment to spring their trap. The insurgents had chosen their ambush site with deadly precision, selecting a location where the convoy would be most vulnerable and escape routes would be limited. The attack, when it came, would be swift and devastating. But, for now, the convoy continued its journey through the increasingly ominous landscape, each member of the security team acutely aware that they were moving deeper into territory where danger could materialize without warning. As they rounded a sharp bend in the road, Marcus caught a glimpse of something that made his blood run cold. A flash of sunlight reflecting off metal, visible for just an instant before disappearing behind a rocky outcropping. It could have been anything, a discarded piece of equipment, a farmer's tool, or something far more sinister. The convoy was about to discover that their routine escort mission had just become a fight for survival, and Marcus Thompson would soon find himself at the center of a desperate battle that would test every ounce of his training and determination. The first explosion shattered the morning calm with devastating force, lifting the lead vehicle off the ground in a twisted ball of flame and metal. Marcus felt the shock wave through his body armor as debris rained down around the convoy, the carefully maintained formation instantly dissolving into chaos. The roadside bomb had been perfectly placed and timed, transforming what moments before had been a routine patrol into a nightmare of smoke, fire, and screaming metal. IED. IED. Lead vehicle is down. The voice over the radio belonged to Jenkins, his usual calm replaced by the urgency of immediate contact. Through the smoke and dust, Marcus could see the burning wreckage that had been their lead Humvee, flames already consuming what remained of the up-armored vehicle. There was no movement from the crew, and the terrible reality of the situation began to sink in. Before anyone could fully process the loss of the lead vehicle, the hillsides around them erupted in a coordinated assault that spoke of careful planning and deadly intent. Muzzle flashes winked from concealed positions among the rocks and vegetation, and the distinctive crack of AK-47 rounds filled the air. The convoy had driven directly into a perfectly orchestrated ambush, with hostile forces positioned to catch them in a devastating crossfire. Marcus immediately began coordinating the response, his training taking over despite the chaos surrounding them. All vehicles, immediate action, return fire, and find cover. His voice cut through the radio chatter as he assessed their tactical situation. They were trapped in a valley with steep sides that provided excellent concealment for the attackers while leaving the convoy exposed on the open road. Rodriguez was already engaging targets to the east, his rifle firing in controlled bursts at muzzle flashes visible in the trailing. "I count at least 8 shooters on the high ground," he reported between shots. "They've got us in a kill zone." The supply trucks, heavy and unwieldy, struggled to maneuver off the roadway as their drivers fought to find any available cover. One truck managed to pull behind a large boulder, while another used the burning wreckage of the lead vehicle as concealment. The third truck took multiple hits, its windshield spiderwebbing under rifle fire, but the driver managed to keep it moving until reaching a shallow depression beside the road. Sarah Mitchell's voice came over the radio from her position with the supply convoy. "We need to break contact and get these trucks out of here. Marcus, what's our best exit route?" Marcus studied the terrain around them while maintaining suppressive fire toward the enemy positions. The road ahead disappeared around another bend, potentially leading into additional ambush positions. Behind them, the route they had just traveled was now likely compromised as well. To their north, the steep hillside offered little hope for the heavy vehicles, while to the south, a deep ravine made movement impossible. "We're boxed in," he realized with growing dread. This wasn't a random attack. They've planned this specifically for this location. The intensity of enemy fire was increasing rather than diminishing, suggesting that the initial assault was just the beginning. More concerning was the disciplined nature of the attack. These weren't amateur fighters taking potshots at a convoy. They were organized combatants with military training and sophisticated tactics. Jenkins managed to work his way forward from the rear vehicle, moving from cover to cover while laying down suppressive fire. "I see RPG teams moving into position on the eastern ridge," he shouted over the gunfire. "If they get a clear shot at the trucks, we're finished." The mention of rocket-propelled grenades added a new dimension of urgency to their situation. The supply trucks, loaded with ammunition and medical supplies, would become massive secondary explosions if hit by RPG fire. Not only would they lose their mission cargo, but the resulting blast could kill everyone in the convoy. Marcus made a crucial decision that would define the next phase of their fight for survival. "Rodriguez, Jenkins, concentrate fire on those RPG teams. Keep them from getting set up. Mitchell, get your drivers ready to move on my signal." The private contractors began working as the coordinated team their training had prepared them to be. Rodriguez identified and engaged enemy positions with precision, his marksmanship skills evident in the way hostile fire began to slacken from certain locations. Jenkins moved with tactical proficiency, using natural cover to advance closer to the enemy positions while maintaining a devastating rate of fire. But for every enemy fighter they neutralized, more seemed to appear from concealed positions throughout the hills. The ambush had been planned with multiple layers of attackers, ensuring that even if the initial assault failed to completely destroy the convoy, follow-up forces would be in position to finish the job. Marcus realized they were facing a much larger force than initial estimates had suggested. Conservative counts put enemy strength at 20 to 30 fighters, but additional muzzle flashes appearing in new positions indicated the number might be significantly higher. The attackers had positioned themselves with overlapping fields of fire, making it nearly impossible for the convoy to move in any direction without exposing themselves to deadly accurate gunfire. The situation became even more desperate when the radio crackled with Mitchell's voice, strain evident despite her attempts to remain professional. "Marcus, I've got wounded in truck 2. Driver took a round to the shoulder, and my gunner is unconscious. We need medical attention now." The convoy's medical supplies were in one of the trucks currently under heavy fire, making it impossible to retrieve the equipment needed to treat wounded personnel. Marcus found himself facing the terrible calculation that defined combat leadership: how to balance the mission requirements against the immediate need to save lives. "Jenkins, can you work your way to truck 2 and assess the wounded?" Marcus called out while engaging a sniper position that had been harassing their eastern flank. "Negative. Too much fire between here and there. We need to suppress those positions first." The enemy fighters had demonstrated tactical sophistication by maintaining consistent pressure rather than rushing their positions. They were content to keep the convoy pinned down while gradually wearing down their resistance through sustained fire. It was a patient, professional approach that suggested these weren't local insurgents, but experienced combatants with military training. As the firefight continued, ammunition began to become a concern. Each contractor carried a standard combat load of ammunition, but sustained contact was depleting their supplies at an alarming rate. Without resupply, they would eventually be forced to ration their fire, giving the enemy an even greater advantage. Marcus assessed their remaining options with the cold calculation that survival required. They could attempt to fight their way back along the road they had traveled, but that would mean abandoning the supply mission and potentially driving into additional ambush positions. They could try to push forward, but the unknown terrain ahead offered no guarantee of safety and might lead them deeper into enemy-controlled territory. The third option was the most dangerous, but potentially their only hope for survival. They would have to assault the enemy positions directly, using their superior firepower and training to break the ambush through aggressive action. It It was a desperate gamble that would require perfect coordination and a significant amount of luck. As Marcus prepared to coordinate what might be their final assault, the sound of additional gunfire echoed from new positions to their rear. The terrible realization dawned on him that they weren't just trapped in an ambush. They were completely surrounded by a force that had planned this attack with deadly precision. The convoy that had left base that morning with confidence in their training and equipment now found themselves fighting for their lives against overwhelming odds, with no clear escape route and dwindling ammunition. The next few minutes would determine whether any of them would survive to tell the story of this devastating ambush. The gunfire suddenly stopped. After 45 minutes of intense combat, the abrupt silence was more terrifying than the chaos that had preceded it. Marcus kept his rifle trained on the hillside positions, expecting the attack to resume at any moment, but seconds stretched into minutes without a single shot being fired. The tactical situation had shifted dramatically, though not in their favor. Why did they stop shooting? Rodriguez whispered, his voice barely audible over the ringing in their ears left by the prolonged firefight. His question hung in the air like smoke from the burning lead vehicle, unanswered and ominous. The answer came in the form of movement along the ridgelines. Instead of muzzle flashes, the contractors now saw figures emerging from concealed positions with their weapons lowered but ready. The enemy fighters were not retreating. They were advancing in a coordinated movement that suggested the firefight had been only the first phase of their operation. Marcus counted at least 30 fighters moving down the hillsides in a tactical formation that demonstrated military training. They wore a mixture of military fatigues and civilian clothing, but their discipline and coordination marked them as experienced combatants rather than improvised local militia. Each squad moved with purpose, covering each other's advance, while maintaining clear fields of fire toward the trapped convoy. "They're coming down to finish us off," Jenkins observed with the matter-of-fact tone of someone who had seen similar situations before. His ammunition was running dangerously low, and he had taken shrapnel to his left arm from an RPG round that had detonated against the rocky outcropping he was using for cover. The enemy's intention became clear as they established a perimeter around the convoy. This wasn't going to be a quick execution by gunfire. The attackers were taking their time, positioning themselves to capture rather than simply eliminate the surviving contractors. The implications of that realization sent a chill through Marcus that had nothing to do with the morning air. "They want prisoners." Mitchell's voice came over the radio, confirming what everyone was beginning to understand. "They're not trying to kill us outright." The tactical situation had evolved into something far worse than a simple ambush. The enemy force had demonstrated the patience and discipline to pin down the convoy until their ammunition ran low, then moved in to capture survivors for purposes that no one wanted to contemplate. Stories of captured contractors and soldiers had filtered through intelligence reports for months, and none of those stories had ended well. Marcus made rapid calculations of their remaining resources. Between all positions, they had perhaps 2 magazines of ammunition remaining, plus whatever rounds were left in currently loaded weapons. Against 30 or more attackers, they could mount a brief but ultimately futile resistance before being overrun. The wounded truck driver was bleeding steadily despite Mitchell's first aid efforts, and they had no way to request support or reinforcement. The enemy commander, a tall man wearing military fatigues and carrying an AK-47 with practiced familiarity, called out in accented English, "American soldiers, your fight is finished. Come out with hands visible, and you will not be harmed." The promise of merciful treatment was contradicted by the expressions on the faces of the fighters surrounding them. These men had the hardened look of veterans who had seen too much combat to harbor illusions about the value of enemy prisoners. Their weapons remained ready, and their positioning suggested they were prepared to cut down anyone who attempted to resist or escape. "What do we do?" Rodriguez asked over the radio, his voice tight with the stress of their impossible situation. Marcus found himself facing the kind of decision that training could prepare for, but never make easier. Surrender meant certain capture and probable execution, but continued resistance with depleted ammunition would result in the same outcome with additional casualties. There were no good options remaining, only varying degrees of disaster. The enemy commander repeated his demand, this time with more authority and less patience. Several fighters had moved close enough that Marcus could see their individual features clearly. One man, younger than the others, kept glancing nervously between his weapon and the convoy, as if unsure about his role in what was about to unfold. "You have 30 seconds to surrender," the commander shouted. "After that, we take you by force." Jenkins attempted to shift position for a better firing angle and immediately drew warning shots that struck the ground near his location. The message was clear. Any movement would be interpreted as hostile action and met with overwhelming force. They were completely trapped, with enemy fighters positioned to eliminate them at the first sign of resistance. The wounded truck driver had lost consciousness, his condition deteriorating rapidly without proper medical attention. Mitchell was doing everything she could with their limited supplies, but trauma care in a combat zone required resources they simply didn't have. Tom was running out in more ways than one. Marcus weighed their chances of fighting their way out against the certainty of capture if they surrendered. The mathematics of the situation were brutally simple. They were outnumbered 10-1, low on ammunition, and trapped in terrain that favored the enemy. Any resistance would be brief and futile, resulting only in additional casualties before the inevitable outcome. 10 seconds, the enemy commander announced, raising his weapon to emphasize the threat. The fighters began moving closer to the convoy positions, their weapons trained on the locations where the contractors were sheltered. Marcus could see the tension in their faces, the anticipation of violence that came with the final moments before an assault. Some appeared eager for the fight to resume, while others maintained the professional demeanor of soldiers following orders they might not entirely agree with. Rodriguez made the decision for them. Standing slowly with his hands clearly visible, he called out, "Don't shoot. We're coming out." One by one, the surviving contractors emerged from their concealed positions with their weapons lowered and their hands raised. The enemy fighters immediately surrounded them, confiscating weapons and searching for additional equipment while maintaining strict security procedures that spoke to their military training. Marcus felt the cold metal of zip ties securing his wrists behind his back as enemy fighters efficiently processed the captured contractors. Their movements were professional and methodical, suggesting they had conducted similar operations before and knew exactly what they were doing. The wounded truck driver was dragged from his vehicle despite Mitchell's protests, his unconscious form handled with little regard for his injuries. The enemy commander examined each prisoner briefly, apparently making mental notes about their condition and potential value for whatever purposes they had in mind. "These contractors will bring good price," one fighter commented to another in broken English, confirming the worst fears about their captors' intentions. They were not being taken prisoner for military intelligence purposes. They were being captured for financial gain through hostage negotiations or worse. As the fighters began organizing for movement away from the ambush site, Marcus realized that their ordeal was just beginning. The failed convoy mission had become a desperate fight for survival, and now that fight was about to enter a new and even more dangerous phase. Whatever happened next would depend on opportunities that didn't yet exist and resources they didn't currently have. The enemy force began moving with the efficiency of a well-trained unit, some fighters gathering intelligence from the destroyed vehicles, while others prepared the prisoners for transport. Marcus caught sight of several fighters photographing the scene with military precision, documenting their successful operation for purposes he could only guess at. The convoy that had left base that morning with confidence and clear mission objectives was now completely destroyed, its cargo scattered and its personnel captured by an enemy force that had demonstrated superior planning and overwhelming tactical advantage. The real fight for survival was about to begin. 3 hours after the ambush, the captured contractors found themselves in what appeared to be an abandoned compound several miles from the attack site. Marcus had managed to keep track of their general direction during the forced march, noting landmarks and terrain features that might prove useful if an escape opportunity presented itself. His military training had taught him that capture was not the end of resistance. It was merely the beginning of a different kind of warfare. The compound consisted of several concrete buildings arranged around a central courtyard, with high walls topped by razor wire that had seen better days. Guard positions at each corner provided excellent observation of the surrounding countryside, while limiting options for anyone attempting to approach or leave undetected. It was clear that their captors had been using this location for some time, given the established nature of their defensive positions and logistics setup. Jenkins had deteriorated during the march, his shrapnel wounds bleeding steadily despite improvised bandaging. The enemy fighters had shown no interest in providing medical care for their prisoners, treating them as cargo rather than human beings requiring basic humanitarian consideration. The wounded truck driver remained unconscious, his breathing shallow and irregular in a way that suggested serious internal injuries. Rodriguez had been separated from the main group immediately upon arrival, led away by several fighters toward one of the buildings. The selection process had seemed arbitrary, but Marcus suspected it was based on some assessment their captors had made about individual prisoners' potential value or resistance. The uncertainty about his teammates' fate added another layer of stress to an already desperate situation. Mitchell was being held in the same room as Marcus and the wounded driver, her medical training making her valuable to their captors who wanted to keep their prisoners alive for whatever purposes they had in mind. She had been allowed to tend to the driver's injuries with minimal supplies, though it was clear that without proper medical facilities, his condition would continue to deteriorate. The room where they were confined had been stripped of anything that could be used as a weapon or tool for escape. Bare concrete walls offered no concealment or leverage for resistance, while a single heavily barred window provided the only natural light. Guards remained posted outside the door at all times, rotating in shifts that suggested their captors understood the importance of maintaining constant security. Through conversations he could overhear from the guards, Marcus began to piece together information about their situation. The ambush had been planned for weeks, with intelligence gathering conducted on convoy routes and timing. Their specific convoy had been targeted not just for the supplies it carried, but because contractor prisoners commanded higher ransoms than captured military personnel. "They're planning to move us tomorrow," Mitchell whispered during a brief period when guard attention seemed focused elsewhere. "I heard them talking about vehicles coming in the morning." The prospect of being moved to another location presented both opportunities and dangers. Transportation would require their captors to divide attention between driving and guarding prisoners, potentially creating moments of vulnerability that could be exploited. However, it also meant movement away from any search and rescue operations that might be mounted from their original base. Marcus had been mentally cataloging everything he observed about their captors' procedures and capabilities. The enemy force numbered approximately 40 fighters, with about half maintaining security around the compound, while the others prepared for what appeared to be a larger operation. Their equipment was a mixture of military surplus and civilian items, but their discipline and coordination remained consistently professional. The leader who had commanded the ambush spent considerable time on communications equipment, speaking in a language Marcus didn't recognize, but with the authoritative tone of someone coordinating with higher command. Maps of the region were spread across a table in the central courtyard, marked with symbols and notations that suggested ongoing operational planning beyond their current prisoners. Late in the afternoon, Rodriguez was returned to their holding area. His face bore evidence of interrogation, but his eyes remained alert and defiant. He had been questioned about convoy schedules, base locations, and personnel numbers, standard intelligence gathering that confirmed their captors' military experience and broader objectives. "They know about the supply schedules," Rodriguez reported quietly. "Someone's been giving them information from inside our operations." The possibility of insider intelligence explained the precision of the ambush and the enemy's detailed knowledge of convoy procedures. It also suggested that additional attacks were being planned, with their current prisoners potentially being used to extract information that would facilitate future operations against American forces. As evening approached, the compound's activity level increased dramatically. Additional vehicles arrived, bringing supplies and what appeared to be senior leadership figures who immediately entered into intensive planning sessions. The increased activity suggested that their captors were preparing for significant operations, with the captured contractors being just one element of a larger campaign. Jenkins' condition continued to worsen despite Mitchell's efforts to treat his wounds with the limited supplies available. Infection was setting in around the shrapnel injuries, and without antibiotics or proper surgical intervention, his situation would become life-threatening within days. The knowledge that medical care was available, but being deliberately withheld, added a layer of psychological pressure to their physical confinement. The wounded truck driver regained consciousness briefly during the evening, long enough to provide his name and ask about the status of other convoy members. Mitchell was able to give him some water and assess his injuries more thoroughly, determining that he likely had internal bleeding that required immediate surgical intervention to prevent fatal complications. Marcus realized that time was becoming their enemy as much as their captors. The longer they remained prisoner, the weaker they would become, and the further they would be moved from potential rescue operations. Any escape attempt would have to be mounted soon, while they still retained enough physical strength and mental clarity to execute a plan successfully. The opportunity came during the midnight guard change, when attention was momentarily focused on shift rotation rather than prisoner security. Marcus had noticed that the guards became less vigilant during transition periods, relying on their counterparts to maintain security while they attended to administrative details. Working with hand signals, Marcus coordinated with Mitchell and Rodriguez to position themselves near the door during the next guard change. The wounded contractor would have to remain behind, unable to participate in any escape attempt in his current condition. It was a terrible choice, but attempting to move him would doom any chance of success and likely result in the execution of all prisoners. The guard change proceeded exactly as Marcus had observed during previous shifts. For approximately 30 seconds, no one was directly monitoring their door as outgoing guards briefed their replacements on prisoner status and compound security. It was a small window of opportunity, but potentially their only chance. Marcus used a piece of concrete he had worked loose from the wall to strike the guard who entered to check on prisoners. The attack was swift and silent, with Rodriguez immediately securing the guard's weapon while Mitchell grabbed the keys to their restraints. Years of military training took over as they moved with practiced efficiency despite their weakened condition. The real test came as they emerged from the building into the compound courtyard. Guards at the perimeter positions remained focused on external threats rather than internal security, but their escape route would take them directly across open ground where discovery was almost certain. Marcus made the decision that would define their survival. Rather than attempting stealth, they would fight their way out with aggressive action that might surprise their captors. The shout of "Who's shooting?" came from a guard position as Marcus opened fire on the nearest observation post with the captured weapon. The question revealed the confusion their sudden attack had created. Their captors had not expected prisoners to mount an armed resistance, and were unsure whether they were under attack from external forces or facing an internal uprising. Rodriguez provided covering fire while Mitchell worked to free the remaining prisoners, including Jenkins, who was barely conscious but still capable of movement. The wounded truck driver had to be left behind, a decision that haunted Marcus even as he recognized its necessity for the survival of the others. The escape became a running firefight across the compound and into the surrounding countryside, with Marcus using every tactical principle he had learned during his military service. Their survival depended on speed, aggression, and the element of surprise, advantages that would not last long once their captors organized an effective pursuit. The wounded private contractor who had ended the mass execution that awaited them was now leading a desperate flight through hostile territory, with enemy forces in pursuit and no guarantee that friendly territory lay ahead. But for the first time since the ambush began, Marcus Thompson felt they had a fighting chance to survive.